On a close and humid August evening in 1977, single mother Peggy Hodgson climbed the stairs of her rented council house in North London to scold her two adolescent girls. Although it was late at night, the preteens were making a racket in their shared bedroom, and Peggy had had enough. She stormed into the room and began to tell the girls to get into bed and quiet down. Yet, she found her two daughters cuddled up in bed together, claiming that they hadn't made any noise at all, but rather the furniture in their room had moved on its own accord. Janet, age 11, and Margaret, age 13, said that their chest of drawers had slid across the room. Before Peggy could even begin to chastise the girls for making up stories, she turned to see the unit moving towards her. She went to push the drawers back towards the wall, yet it was immovable. Slowly, she turned to look at her two terrified daughters and realized that this was well beyond a childhood prank or silly girls not wanting to go to sleep at night. That night, the entire family, Peggy, Janet, Margaret, and little brothers Johnny, age 10, and Billy, age 7, all congregated together, terrified as they heard unexplainable knocking noises fill the home. The next day, after a long 24 hours of noise, fear, and moving furniture, Peggy bundled up the children and ran to the neighbor's house for help. Shocked and confused, neighbor Vic Nottingham went into the home at 284 Green Street and checked the house for intruders or vermin. Being a builder himself, Vic was on the hunt for a natural explanation to the family's claims. Yet as he walked through the home, he was confronted by strange knocking noises that followed him as he walked from room to room. Panicked and perplexed, the adults called the police. The family reported that they had been hearing knocking throughout the home. Furniture had been moving by itself, and Janet claimed her little brother's bed had been seen rocking and shaking. Technically, there had not been a crime committed, and there was, of course, the possibility that this was all a childhood prank. But nevertheless, there were children involved, so the police did search the home and talked at length with Peggy and the children. Whilst in the home, Police Constable Caroline Heaps witnessed a chair in the living room began to wiggle and then slide 3 or 4 feet across the room towards the kitchen. There was no one near the chair, yet it looked as though it was being dragged across the floor. Hastily, the officers departed. Alone and helpless, the family stood dumbfounded in their once peaceful home, now plagued with strange happenings. On Sunday, September 4th, 7 days after the first experience, a desperate Peggy Hodgson called the Daily Mirror, a newspaper, in hopes that they could put her in contact with a person or organization who could help the family. Intrigued, the Mirror sent over Graham Norris, a photographer, and reporter Douglas Bentz to investigate the home. From 7 p.m., the duo spent the evening in the Hodgsons' home, waiting to capture evidence of the paranormal. Yet after several cups of tea and polite small talk, nothing happened. At 2 a.m., the pair packed up their belongings and headed to the car. Yet no sooner had photographer Graham Morris put his camera in the trunk, Vic Nottingham ran out of 284 Green Street, exclaiming that the activity had begun. The pair ran into the house and were aghast as they witnessed marbles and Legos fly across the room. Graham was even hit in the head with a soaring Lego brick. Camera in hand, Graham snapped away as Legos flew effortlessly through the air. However, much to everyone's dismay, after the photos were developed, they failed to show the phenomenon in action. Yet, reporters Morris and Benz were in no doubt that this did in fact happen, and there was no way the children or the adults had done it. Fully committed to the case, yet aware that they were out of their depths, the Daily Mirror contacted the Society for Psychical Research based in Kensington to ask for some help. Here enters Maurice Gross, new yet enthusiastic member of the society. Pulling up to the home on Green Street, he must have been quite a sight in his cherry red E-Type Jaguar. Not knowing what to expect, he found the Hodgson family, along with the Nottinghams, in 284. And the energy, fear, and chaos was palpable. Gross described the scene as disturbed. He theorized that this activity could be due to a poltergeist. What ensued was a 14-month investigation into what we now call the Enfield poltergeist. The activity was rampant and diverse. Objects and furniture moving around the room, knocks, disembodied voices, belongings disappearing only to reappear at a later date, beds shaking, buzzing noises, crashing and scratching sounds. All classic hallmarks of poltergeist activity. The word poltergeist in German literally translates to knocking spirit. And in German and now general folklore, they are spirits or ghosts of a naughty, mischievous, and destructive nature. After the Mirror began to go live with their reportings on the home, everyone wanted a piece of this paranormal pie. The BBC sent Rosalind Morris from Radio 4 to also cover the case. And although she wasn't keen on the assignment at first, she would not leave the Green Street property disappointed. On her very first visit in the middle of the night after all the family had gone to sleep, Rosalind and Gross were sitting in the living room when they heard a mighty crash up in the girls' bedroom above them. They darted up the stairs to find a chair had been thrown and overturned 9 feet across the room. Of course, Janet or Margaret could have done it, but according to Rosalind and Gross, they were fast asleep and did not appear to be faking. But flying chairs and Legos were just the beginning. In October, the family claimed a heavy iron gas fire was pulled from the fireplace and levitated over the bed. And then came the fits and rages. Over the past few months, Janet had begun to show changes in her demeanor and behavior. She would erupt in series of fits and seizures and appeared to be possessed. As night would fall, Janet would come alive. She would be thrown across her bedroom, levitate off her bed. She was pulled from her bed and even thrown headfirst down the stairs. Amazing photos of these scenes have immortalized this strange activity and are part of the case's best and most controversial evidence. Truly concerned for the young girl, one Dr. Ian Fletcher came to hypnotize her and try to get to the bottom of the activity. While under hypnosis, Dr. Fletcher asked Janet who was doing this to her. At first, she responded, her and her sister, and then followed with, she didn't know. When asked about what it felt like to be pulled from the bed, she described it as though cold hands had been clutching her and pulling her. Dr. Fletcher believed that the sisters were doing some of the activity, but not intentionally, but rather because something was making them. At this point, you may be inclined to believe the two girls were perpetrating a hoax to either get attention, simply have fun, or perhaps their original prank had just blossomed and grew beyond their original intention. However, on December 15th, 1977, 2 separate witnesses, a bread delivery man and a lollipop lady, both independently saw Janet through her bedroom window, floating horizontally while toys and books surrounded her, suspended as though by magic. But the unbelievable claims don't end here. One afternoon, investigator Gross heard a dog barking in the Green Street home. However, there was no dog. It became clear that the barking, which soon morphed into speaking, was emanating from Janet. But these were not the voices of a child, but rather a guttural, gravelly, husky, elderly man. BBC reporter Rosalind Morris even interviewed the voice coming from Janet and caught it on camera.
Talk to Rosalind, she wants to talk to you.
Hello.
Good evening. Good evening. Are there two of you there?
Yeah.
What are you called?
Tom and Dick.
And where's Harry? That's a joke,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Can you tell me where you are at the moment in the room?
On top of Janet.
Why do you sleep on top of Janet?
It's my bed.
Why can't Janet feel you?
I'm invisible.
Why are you invisible?
So I'm a G-H-O-S-T.
The adults did accuse Janet of putting on the voice, but Janet was adamant that it actually came from behind her. To test her claims, Gross filled her mouth with water and then taped her lips shut. Yet the voice still spoke. This voice may have been the final straw for some. There were skeptics from the start, but the origin of this voice was clear to many, that it had been coming from Janet. Even photographer Graham Morris, who had witnessed activity himself and was even hit in the head by a flying Lego, did not believe this voice was genuine. Had it all gone too far? Was Janet now performing? After a year of constant activity, Janet was sent to the Maudsley Hospital in South London. Janet was subjugated to a litany of medical and psychological tests. But after 2 months of poking and prodding, she was discharged with a clean bill of health. Friday, September 1st, 1978, nearly 1 year to the day after the activity began, Janet returned home. After her stay at the hospital, activity did quiet down. Maurice Gross would say that activity eased as the family's stress levels reduced. Some theorized that the girl's onset of puberty initiated the activity to begin with. The theory goes that their spiraling hormones and energy could have created a kind of psychokinesis, and as they aged, the activity fell away. Ed and Lorraine Warren, who would later go on and investigate the home, would of course say that it was paranormal. And a huge subsect of the press and population would say that it was little more than a hoax. Regardless of what we may think, no one connected to this case, from Caroline Heaps, the police constable, to Rosalind Morris, the BBC reporter, or the Hodgson family themselves, have ever changed their accounts of what happened in the house at 284 Green Street. This This is the penultimate episode before the season 4 of The West London Witch comes to a close. After episode 75 goes live, we'll go quiet on your feed for a spell while we prepare for the launch of season 5. But that doesn't mean that there is not a ton of new West London Witch content going live over the summer. This summer, I have a very special treat for all of our West London Witch listeners. I have secured a first edition copy of the 1980 cult classic, Michelle Remembers, the book that set off the satanic panic and created shockwaves across the globe. Join me this summer on Patreon, where I will be reading the entire book to you, chapter by chapter, providing commentary, thoughts, and theories along the way. This book is incredibly expensive and difficult to get a hold of. But for as little as $1, €1, £1 a month, you can hang out with me virtually as I dissect the entire book for you from the cozy comfort of Cobweb Cottage. Not only will you gain access to this exclusive summer reading program, but you will also unlock the entire West London Witch Patreon catalog to keep you company until the premiere of season 5. Join us at patreon.com/The West London Witch for one hell of a spooky summer. Hello and welcome to episode 74 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. There is nothing that I love more than a haunted house. If you've listened to episode 1, you know this house is haunted. Then you'll recall my own family's dark experience in a haunted home. And since then, I have been hooked and fascinated by harrowing hauntings that take place in our homes. Today, Rory from Project Entity, a paranormal team based here in the UK, is here to tell us about his experience of growing up in a seriously haunted house. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is The West London Witch. Episode 74, Home is Where the Haunt Is.
Back in the probably mid to late 80s, so between 1985 and 1995, I lived in a house in Wollaston, and this was like a council house, which my parents rented from the local government while they were saving to buy a house of their own. In this house, there was never really anything out of the ordinary. It was just quiet, pleasant, 3-bedroom terraced house. So you had neighbours on either side. A pleasant house, nothing but pleasant memories in that house. However, my first experience in the paranormal field was in a small back bedroom that I shared with my younger brother. And we had a bunk bed that we shared. I would sleep on the top bunk. My younger brother would sleep on the bottom bunk. And then my older brother, he had a box bedroom next to him. And I can remember the details of this room, really well. I can remember where my bed was positioned, my shelves with all my toys and games on it, like my school desk. One night, I was sleeping in the top bunk and I woke up, and at the bottom of my bed, there was an old lady. And the only way I can describe it, and this, I've always said it to anyone, she was just looking at me with utter anger and distaste, staring at me. And I can only describe, I was pulled out of my bed. I landed on the floor and I hid under the covers. And before I hid under the covers, I looked at her and she was absolutely furious. I don't know if you've ever seen The Sixth Sense when that child hides under the blanket. It was like that. I hid under the blanket and I woke up in the morning where she'd pulled me or thrown me on the floor.
Rory was very, very little when this event occurred, but it had a profound effect on him even to this day. He told me he would love to undergo regression via hypnosis to relive this moment and ensure that it happened just the way he remembers, and perhaps pick up some more information and clues that his child mind didn't initially notice. He never told his family about this event until he was an adult. Upon hearing the story, his mother froze and turned white.
And she said, well, funny enough, the house that we lived in previously, an old lady had died there. And the back bedroom, which is where the bedroom me and my brother had shared together, was actually her bedroom. And the only way I can think about it was from how she looked at me so angry, was maybe she didn't realise she had died and she saw me or someone in her bedroom and she was just infuriated by it and pulled me out. And that's the only way I could think to explain it, really.
As terrifying as this encounter was, it would soon pale in comparison to the next home Rory's family would move to. The home that Rory would consider his true childhood home.
I grew up in a very haunted house, which belonged to my great aunt. So back in 1995, my great aunt, which was my dad's aunt, she had passed away, and she lived in a house which she'd had pretty much her entire life. In the UK, these would be called a council house, which people would have rented from the local government. When my great aunt passed away, we had the opportunity to purchase the house.
This truly was a family home. Rory's great aunt was the original and only occupant of the house. This was a great opportunity to keep the house in the family. Rory's great aunt was his father's aunt, and the two had been extremely close. So purchasing this house was a wonderful way for Rory's dad to stay connected to his favorite aunt.
We moved in 1995, and we had very, very strange occurrences happening in the house straight away. My great aunt, she had actually died in, which was like called the dining room, which is like the back of the house. And unfortunately, she had passed away asleep in an armchair with the fire on, and she wasn't actually discovered for like a few weeks, which was really sad. Upon moving into the house, we noticed very strange cold spots in the room where she had died, in the chair, which is really strange, being next to like a gas fire and an external wall. It's not somewhere where you would naturally find cold spots. But the strange thing is, it was really centered around my mother. She would pick up on these things. She would sit down in the chair and she would have really cold, icy chills that would go down her back to her feet. The whole room would just go icy cold. When my mother was in there, she'd call my father in and he would go in and assess the situation, and the room would completely lift. It would become light and airy. It was like a real sort of stark contrast in feelings. And this sort of progressed and went on for quite a few months before me or my siblings started to experience anything in the room.
Although activity began in the back dining room, it wasn't long before the strange occurrences began to bleed into different corners of the home.
We started experiencing things in the kitchen. So, for example, we'd have glass tumblers that would be on the table. We could actually see some occasions they'd start to rotate, and sometimes they'd actually slide along the counter, probably by only a couple of centimetres. But this would be like when there's lots of people present in the room. So a prime example was at my younger brother's birthday party. I think he would have been about 7 at the time. We're sitting there with a group of friends, and we literally had a glass tumbler fly off the table. And that was sort of my real experience of things that were starting to be a bit strange in the house. After that, we started to notice strange noises like vases or vases on the windowsills. It would sound like people would be flicking them, sliding them across the ledge.
Activity was constant. Strange sounds, cold spots, the feeling of being watched or followed, colored each and every day. But it was in the late 90s, the house underwent a total energetic shift. And not one for the better.
And at the time, I was about 13 years old. And I can remember this like it was yesterday. It was a Sunday afternoon. And being a typical child at that sort of time, I was playing on one of these like old handheld Game Boys. And I was playing on my Game Boy, sitting in this back room, the dining room where my great aunt had died, sitting cross-legged on the sofa. And behind the sofa, my mum and dad they were kind of like hoarders really. They'd keep certain magazines, and my young sister's booster seat behind the sofa and stuff out of sight. So it's just a load of junk and papers and stuff behind the sofa. But on this Sunday, my younger sister, she was crying upstairs. So my mother went up to check on her while I was playing on my Game Boy. And she's probably gone about 10, 15 minutes or something like that. And she came back down, and I had probably the biggest telling off of my entire life. And I paused my Game Boy, and the sofa that I'd been sitting on had actually moved probably about a foot away from the wall. And everything behind the sofa had been flung all over the room. So there was like newspapers, magazines, letters, like these draft excluders all over the room. It's like a hurricane had been through the room. The scary thing was though, because I was so engrossed in my game, I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't even felt the sofa move.
As Rory surveyed the mess that surrounded him, he was equal parts shocked and terrified. How could this have happened without him noticing? Who would have done this? Even though his mother had experienced cold spots, heard strange noises, and felt odd feelings in the home, this had gone a step too far.
She thought it was me messing around as a child, so I was promptly grounded and sent to my room, which was terrible. And the following day, I went to school and just sitting petrified in the lessons, dreading going back to the house because of what had happened.
From this moment on, activity not only ramped up in the home, but became a constant rain of terror and fear.
My siblings would hear people run up and down the stairs at night on the weekends, real big resounding footsteps thumping up and down the stairs, and which was absolutely terrifying at the time. My father had started to witness things as well in the house, strange sort of smells that emanating from the kitchen, almost like smoke and ladies' perfume. The strange thing is my dad was actually very, very close to his aunt. It was my nan's sister, and sort of talking about some of the phenomena that we experienced there, like the things with the vases and the perfume. My nan actually said that her sister had a habit of flicking flower vases on the windowsills. So we sort of naturally started to think, well, maybe it was my dad's auntie that was causing the phenomena. The only thing was that it was, as children, it was really frightening. It was horrendous, to be honest.
The whole family was now experiencing unexplained phenomenon. Could it be the aunt? Maybe. But why would she want to scare the family? Why would she make a mess and let Rory take the fall? Why keep the children up at night? And the aspect of the fear is what most perplexed Rory.
Fast forward probably about a year or so, I was upstairs in the bathroom, having a bath. I was probably 14, something like this, 15 at the time. And we used to have a big, large, round, circular mirror on the bathroom door. Climbing out the bath, I saw a glimpse of an old lady in the mirror, which, and I don't mind saying this at all. I mean, I'm quite brave now, but back then I don't mind saying that I hid in the bathtub. We had a large cast iron bathtub with really high walls, and because the mirror was on the door, I felt trapped in the bathroom, couldn't get out there at all, and calling for my parents, but unfortunately they're watching a television program downstairs, couldn't hear me at the time. So I ended up stuck in the bath hiding for about an hour or something like that, till my older brother managed to come up, and at this point I promptly ran out of the bathroom.
This experience complicated things even more. Why would the aunt appear to a scared and vulnerable teenager? It was an odd conundrum.
So obviously a lot of the activity stemmed from the dining room and into the kitchen and into the bathroom. Now, activity in the house probably started, as I said, about 1995 when we moved in, and carried on going until about 2004, which is the last sort of episode that we had in the house. But after meeting my girlfriend, which is now my wife at the time, she used to come to my parents' house to visit and that, and she was always, never told her anything, but she was always had a really horrible feeling in the dining room, and especially in the bathroom. She would never go to the bathroom late at night without me walking down with her, just because this horrible, eerie, gut-wrenching sort of feeling she had centered around the bathroom. Things continued, as I said, until 2004, but before that we had a border collie. And I don't know what your take is on animals sort of sensing spirit and what they can pick up on. For some reason, my border collie, we never used to let the dog upstairs. It's just a sort of rule that we had in my mum's house. They'd never let it upstairs. The dog went upstairs into the bathroom, and we used to have a chute bolt on the bathroom door, which is really high up, probably about 5 foot up on the door, really high up. And I heard a scratching noise, and I went upstairs to the bathroom, and the dog had been locked in the bathroom.
This chute bolt was high, 5 feet up the door. There is no way the dog could have slid it in place, and there was no unlocking the door from the outside. The family had to break down the door to liberate the dog. The poor collie came out of the bathroom, shaken, crying, and terrified to the core. But there is one more bizarre experience centered around the bathroom that has been really unsettling to Rory.
I heard a girl crying upstairs, and I thought, oh, it's my sister Rose. What's the matter with her? So I went upstairs, checked the bathroom where I thought the sound was coming from. Absolutely dead silent when I got to the top of the stairs. As soon as I got to the top of the landing, the crying stopped, and knocked on my sister's door, and she had headphones on. She was just listening to music.
As the kids got older, activity sometimes slowed down, but it never ceased. And you never knew when the house was going to act up.
Probably about 2003. I used to work in bar job. And my parents, straight after, probably about a year after I lost my father, my mum went on holiday with my young siblings, and I was left in the house alone. This is before I moved out and got my own place. And sleeping in the house at night, we could hear footsteps on the stairs, stomping slowly, coming up the stairs, around the landing, and then climbing the second staircase to my room, which was in the attic at the time, and then walking back down the stairs slowly, 2 flights of stairs down to the bottom. But this process carried on for about 10 minutes, and the only way I can describe it was every time the footsteps went up the stairs, they got faster and faster, so it sounded like almost at one point it was like someone running up and down the stairs at breakneck speed. And again, I don't mind saying this, I hid under the covers, and I was about 16 at the time. I don't mind saying that just because of how frightening of an experience it was. Went downstairs the next day, and in the kitchen there was a pair of coffee mugs that I left out. However, they're full of spoons. So really strange, really random.
This is proper poltergeist activity. But the real question here is, why? I'm not totally convinced that it is connected to the aunt.
The strange thing about the house itself was, it was a council house, and it's only ever been family that have lived in this house. Excuse me. But the roads were built apparently by German prisoners of war. So we never really understood who it was or what was happening in the house and who was causing it. because it's only been my great auntie that had lived in the house. And as I said, she was very, very close to my father. I don't know why she would be causing the sort of disruptions that we had that were very negative. Whether or not it was her I saw in the bathroom mirror, I don't know, because I'd never met her, you see. But the sofa moving and things being thrown over the place and the dog being locked in the bathroom and a lot of the poltergeist phenomena, I don't know why she would do that to frighten us as children. It's really strange. So we've often tried, researching the house to see, who had built it and if that had anything to do with it at all. So imagine prisoners of war probably had a rather negative experience, you see.
This theory that the home could be haunted by the POWs who built the area is a very interesting and compelling idea. However, there could be another explanation altogether for the family's experiences inside of the home.
I try to think about things rationally, and I've read lots of things about poltergeist activity to do with hormones and stuff like that. I don't know if any of the viewers and listeners have heard anything about that. And I have to think, in my teenage years, could that have had anything to do with it? But then when I think about the auditory phenomena that I heard, like the crying and the dog being physically locked in the bathroom, the sensations that you would get in the house, even things like, times you would hear your name being whispered in the kitchen, which is really, really unnerving. Despite all this, though, it's very intriguing, but I've never felt any sort of desire to investigate the place with my team. My mum still lives in the house and she's had no issues, as I said, since probably 2004. But out of sheer fear of sort of starting things up again, I just want to leave it well alone and not meddle with it, really.
The really interesting thing about this house is that for the past 20 years, it has been silent. A normal, happy, comfortable family home. Rory's mom is content and at peace there. Rory and his wife feel relaxed in the space. No one is afraid of the bathroom or hear their name being ominously whispered in the night. The house is just a house.
But the experiences in that house is kind of what got me into investigating the paranormal. I often find that I'm comparing my experiences in the field to what I experienced back then as a child and as a teenager. And it's almost like a bar. And I can honestly say I've been investigating since probably 2005, so nearly 20 years. And everything I've experienced in the field is nowhere near what I experienced in that house.
I agree with Rory. It is probably not the best idea to poke the metaphorical beast and conduct an investigation in the home. Let sleeping dogs lie, I say. But without any closure or clarity, would you always wonder who or what was haunting you? And if one day it may suddenly return? I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. What do you think was haunting the family? If you're listening on Spotify, you can answer on the poll. Alternatively, you can reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this case, come and join us on Patreon, where we have an entire discussion thread dedicated to this story. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Struzina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.